How much of a surprise do you think this is for Apple and Tim Cook? Because we know that they had been in discussions with President Trump during the first Trump administration and gotten an exclusion. And there's been hints dropped along the way this time around that things were not going as well. The president saying this month that he had a little problem with Tim Cook.
I think it is a surprise. You talked about this 8 years of almost this partnership that's been between Apple and Trump. Apple, of course, being the global symbol of innovation, and Trump recognizing that and really boasting, of course, in the first round of tariffs 8 years ago, Apple was spared from those largely, and the expectation was a lot of that would continue. And so this is a noteworthy shift in terms of how the White House is thinking about Apple. And I think it comes in part because Trump has had some political momentum over the last 3 weeks, which gives him an opportunity to kind of negotiate essentially with business leaders through his commentary in other countries. And so I think that's one piece, is he's using this Apple commentary as a simple way to talk about even higher, moving tariffs even higher after that 10% kind of benchmark that was set with the UK. So I think that's one piece to what's going on. Of course, you can't tariff one country. You have to tariff, you can't tariff a specific company. You tariff a product category.
Yeah.
And so I think that dynamic was pretty unique. And then separately, I think Trump very much wants to bring manufacturing of things like pharma and advanced electronics into the U.S. because of just a change in their globalization act. So I think he really wants to encourage not just Apple, but other companies to do just that.
Right. So from what I'm hearing, you think in a way, it's the president flexing after a pretty successful overseas trip. Is this a way also for the president to get Tim Cook to pressure China to make certain concessions or make more concessions as U.S. and Chinese negotiators figure out the trade situation there?
So the truth lies below the surface, and I talked about some topics that are at the top of the surface, but you are correct to mention is that there's another piece to this too, is that by asking him to bring more stuff, Tim Cook to bring more manufacturing to the U.S., that could help with the negotiations with China because, of course, there's a lot of Chinese that are employed, call it 1 million directly, with manufacturing Apple devices. But when you look at the broader ecosystem, it's multiple times higher than that. So China's a big country, but Apple still matters when it comes to their economy. And I think that is another piece that could be below the surface. I do want to mention, too, about just the tariff piece. I think there's an important piece that's been largely missed today in terms of this 25% tariff. I want to make sure we cover this, is that the sense is that means that the price of iPhones are going to go up by 25%. And I recently talked to a high-level former U.S. trade official, and just want to be clear is that the tariff is not on the retail price, it is on the cost coming into the country. So what that kind of means is it's going to be more like a 14% price increase. So I just want to make sure that people are aware in terms of the headline of that 25%, that stinging headline. In reality, it's not as bad as that headline would suggest.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Gene. I am curious, though, if we do get to a point where that cost does actually become real and not just theoretical, what does that mean for the bottom line? Are you modeling in any sort of material decrease in sales, and are you modeling any sort of decrease in profitability?
And I am modeling for that. And just to put some perspective on it, the Street's looking for about 5% growth for iPhones for this year. And I'm at 4%, so a slight discount. But also my margins are a little bit lower. So right now, the Street's generally at about 44% on the gross margin side. And if you assume that there's a 25% tariff and Apple basically takes the majority of that hit, that margin would come to 41%. And so that's the delta there, 7% below where the Street's at right now. So there is some nagging here. I think that ultimately, the mystery around where these numbers are going is probably more painful than the actual bite of the numbers.
Yeah.
That's, of course, what stung the stock on the last earnings report. Great earnings report, great outlook for June, but investors still are concerned about the back half.
Can we just spend a couple minutes, though, just talking about maybe the possibility of actually trying to reshore some of this stuff? Someone reminded me earlier that Apple actually tried this maybe about 10 years or so with the iMac, and apparently did not go very well, primarily because of a lot of the issues that we talk about with the iPhone, the lack of expertise here, Obviously, you have a job environment here that's a lot different. You can't push the workers to do the same thing here that you maybe can do in China or Vietnam, Indonesia. Is there, though, a case to be made that with the advances in automation and some of the other things that maybe take some of the human equation out, that there could be some chunk of that capacity that maybe could come back here to the United States?
The simple answer is yes. I would expect that the upshoot of all of this is going to be that you're going to see a small amount of iPhones being made in the U.S. I think that piece around the modernization, around robotics, all that can help, but still is not going to solve the challenge of the price of an iPhone going up 2-3x if it was made in the U.S. And so in order for that to happen, that really needs Congress to do something like happened with the CHIPS Act. That, of course, has had a big impact in terms of how NVIDIA and TSMC have been investing more into advanced chips in the U.S. We need to see the same thing when it comes to manufacturing devices. And what that kind of comes down to is effectively tax dollars going to companies like Apple and other people who are building this critical technology for them to basically burden or to share some of that burden of the cost. And so I think that the answer is we're going to see a little bit more, but to see it in earnest, it's going to take a much bigger effort by Congress and the president to do just that.